Three young girls posed outside a cloth-making factory for a picture in 1912, with no idea what would come later. 100 years later, scientists looked at the photo very carefully and found something that shocked them. The Lorry mill was full of loud machine sounds, and cotton dust flew around in the stuffy rooms. Pearl Turner straightened her dress and stood tall. The man with the camera had asked them to step outside for a quick break. "Hurry up, Pearl," her big sister Viola shouted, fixing her plain work dress. "Mr. Hines said we can't stay away from our jobs too long." "I'm coming now," Pearl replied, trying not to cough as they went outside into the clean air. Pearl was just 9 years old, about to turn 10, but she had already been working at the mill for 3 years. Her tiny hands had gotten good at running the risky spinning machines. Louis Hine, the man taking pictures, positioned the three girls in front of the mill's main building. Pearl stood on the left, her dark eyes looking older and more serious than a child her age should. Viola, who was 14, looked exhausted in a deep way, and she stood on the right. Mary Ashworth, a 12-year-old from nearby who worked on their floor, stood in the middle. "Stay still now," Mr. Hines said, going under the black cover over his camera. A second later, there was a bright flash, and the three girls' faces were saved forever. 3 young, stiff faces in front of the place that stole their childhood. None of them knew that this one picture would survive for over 100 years and would later show something amazing to scientists. Pearl looked one more time at the photographer before going back into the mill with her sister, back to the endless noise and floating cotton dust that would cause bad health problems later. More than 100 years later, Dr. Margaret Hamilton looked up from her computer and saw her research helper William Thompson standing at her door. He was carrying a folder and looked really excited. "What did you find?" she asked, taking off her reading glasses. William Thompson came to her desk and opened the folder. "This is from the Louis Hine photo collection that we're turning into computer files," he said. "This picture is from 1912, 3 factory girls in Gastonia." Dr. Margaret Hamilton studied the photo closely. She saw 3 young girls with serious faces standing in front of what looked like an office building. "What makes it special?" she asked. "We've looked at hundreds of Hines photos of working children. Look at this girl," William Thompson said, pointing to the one on the left. "Based on Hines' notes, this is Pearl Turner. She wasn't even 10 years old yet, but she had already been working at the mill for 3 years. But that's not the most interesting thing," he went on, turning to another paper. "I found her death certificate. She lived until 1964. That's very rare for mill workers from that time, especially ones who started working so young. And there's more. We have records of talks with her children from 2006 and 2007. Dr. Margaret Hamilton sat forward, getting more curious. She taught classes during the day and spent her extra time organizing old documents for research. Lately, she had been studying a time when children working was normal. The subject was very sad, but she stayed calm and dealt with it head-on. William Thompson, her research helper, was always excited, very different from her. He always spotted tiny details, but never pushed for deeper research unless it was really worth it. This new case seemed to be important, at least to him. "Can we use computer face reading on this old photo to learn more?" William Thompson asked eagerly, maybe too excited. "If we could make this picture clearer, it could really help our research." "I've already written the request letter. I just need you to say yes." Margaret Hamilton thought about what he asked for a moment, then gave a quick nod. William Thompson's rare excitement was unusual but interesting to watch. For some reason, it made her feel hopeful that they might find something groundbreaking. She had no idea how right this feeling would be. 3 weeks later, Dr. Margaret Hamilton stared at her computer screen, comparing the improved image with other articles and photos from the Lewis Hine collection. When she couldn't find anything important, she made her search bigger to include things like cloth-making records and health journals. William Thompson had done most of the work, finding and talking to everyone connected to this mystery photograph. At first, their plan was to study the image and figure out who Mary Ashworth was, since she was the only one of the three girls with no follow-up information. But the more they looked at the photo, the more their focus moved from Mary Ashworth to Pearl, the smallest girl. For some reason, they both felt something unusual about her and her story. Dr. Margaret Hamilton zoomed in on Pearl's image, looking at every detail with careful focus. She studied her face, skin tone, hair, and the way she stood under the old brown-colored lighting, comparing every detail with the health journals spread on her desk. After working for 2 days, she finally had a breakthrough. The university's fancy computer imaging system had found something in the original photo that had been missed for over a century. Her heart started beating faster as she realized what they had found. "This changes everything we thought we knew about cloth mill workers and their health," she whispered, reaching for her phone to call William Thompson. "Get me Dr. Charles Mitchell from the Medical History Department." That evening, Margaret Hamilton found herself talking to a room full of teachers and historians, many from the Medical History Department. Behind her, shown on a big screen, was the Lewis Hine photo from 1912, digitally improved to show details invisible to normal eyesight. "Hello, everyone," she started. "What you're looking at might be one of the most important historical medical discoveries of the decade." 3 young girls photographed outside the Loray Mill in Gastonia, North Carolina, in 1912. Like thousands of children during that time, they worked long hours in dangerous conditions, constantly breathing in cotton fibers and dust that usually caused lung diseases and early death. She clicked to the next slide, showing a close-up image of Pearl Turner's face. The audience leaned forward in their chairs, trying to see the subtle details her team had found. Using fancy imaging technology made for fixing artwork, we looked at this photo in amazing detail, she explained. What we found in the face structure and visible skin marks of this 9-year-old girl, Pearl Turner, suggests she had a genetic difference that was never recorded before. Quiet conversations started around the room. Professor Henry Watson, a top genetics expert, shook his head in disbelief, but instead of saying his doubts out loud, he let Dr. Margaret Hamilton continue. "Based on medical records we've gathered, Pearl Turner lived until she was 66 years old, which was amazingly long for someone who began mill work at age 6 or 7, she continued. "Her sister Viola, however," she said, pointing to the girl on the right of the image, "died from tuberculosis just 4 years after this photo was taken, when she was only 17. And, like her, 4 out of the 8 siblings died before reaching age 20. This difference within the same family made us ask our first questions." Dr. Margaret Hamilton clicked to the next slide, showing medical charts. "I believe Pearl Turner had a rare genetic difference that gave her better resistance to the harmful effects of textile particles on lung tissue," she stated. "My idea is that she had a variant of the mCoNAR gene, which usually controls skin color and other genetic differences in people." Margaret Hamilton made her point stronger by pointing out the difference in skin tone between the 2 sisters in the photo. At first look, someone might think Pearl was of Indian background because of her darker skin and features, she noted. However, that wasn't completely the case. Beyond the usual skin and eye effects, studies have shown that some people with certain mCoNAR variants have lower sensitivity to pain, she said calmly, hoping to make her point clear. "Notice these subtle face features, the slightly wider nose structure and the unique eyelid pattern," she pointed out. These show what we now believe is an adaptive trait that developed in response to factory working conditions. We don't know how, but Pearl's genes were somehow ready ahead of time to resist the damaging effects of working in the mill. William Thompson spoke to the room before adding his thoughts. Even though this is just one recorded case, the professor believes it points to a fascinating possibility that human adaptation to factory conditions happened much more quickly than we previously thought possible. This small meeting was just the beginning. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Even though the scientists were excited about what they had found, they wanted to learn more to help with their studies. While they were looking for new information, they accidentally found something even more surprising. After a few months, Dr. Margaret Hamilton was knocking on Sarah Jenkins's door. Sarah was Pearl Turner's daughter and was now over 70 years old. The older woman invited her into a plain living room filled with family photos from many years. Sarah Jenkins held the clearer picture of her mother as a young girl with trembling hands. Mom never knew why she lived so much longer than her brothers and sisters, she said softly. She always said she was just too tough to give up. Dr. Margaret Hamilton grinned. Tough, that's true, but also amazing in ways she never could have imagined, she answered. Your mother's body was able to deal with the factory conditions in a special way that we're just starting to figure out. Sarah Jenkins touched the picture softly. Looking back at old memories made her feel happy and sad at the same time. She shared stories with Dr. Margaret Hamilton about growing up, at least the parts she could still remember. Pearl Turner got married to her dad, Frank Jenkins, when she was 19. Both of them worked at the factory, so everything in their lives centered around the mill. When her first daughter Ruth was born, Pearl stopped working at the factory. Sarah Jenkins came along 3 years after that, making their family complete with 4 people. As kids, the girls had everything they needed. The mill owners gave them their house and school. Plus, everybody in this tight community knew each other well. Sarah Jenkins talked about how close everyone was, describing how neighbors would help each other out without expecting anything back. Things were good for their family, but sadly, there were hard times too, especially for Pearl, who sometimes had trouble breathing. Sarah Jenkins grew up seeing her mother struggle with health issues while her father kept working at the mill. Pearl always stayed at home, spending time talking with friends and making clothes for Sarah Jenkins and Ruth. It was always heartbreaking to see, she remembered. Sarah Jenkins said she didn't know much about her mother's family. She knew lots of stories about her father's relatives, but her mother's stories were always full of sadness and tragedy. Almost all of Pearl's family members had died before Sarah Jenkins was even born. Pearl's father died after a terrible fight with a painful disease called gout. Pearl's mother was so shocked that she had a stroke and died just weeks later. Ruth was only 2 when all these awful things happened. Like her grandparents, Sarah Jenkins's other relatives on her mother's side had either disappeared, moved away after marriage, or passed away. She always thought these bad things happened because of the problems that came with the growing factory world. Margaret Hamilton had incredible news for her. Sarah Jenkins's mother had genes that were almost like a superhero's, especially when it came to healing her body. Sarah Jenkins stared at the picture of Pearl that she had never seen before. Even though it was pretty faded, she could still make out her mother's tiny face. It's horrible to think this little girl had to get used to those deadly machines when she was so young, she said, with sadness. What makes it even worse is that being around those terrible conditions caused awful problems for her and our family for many years. The thought made her heart ache. She had breathing problems her entire life, but unlike her brothers and sisters, she survived, Sarah Jenkins said. That's exactly what makes her so amazing, Doctor, Margaret Hamilton replied. Even though her lungs were hurt, her body could fix damaged tissue in ways that other people's bodies couldn't. We think she gave some of these special abilities to you and your sister Ruth." Sarah Jenkins looked up with interest. "Ruth passed away in 2008, she said. She suffered from asthma all her life, but she made it to 82. "That's incredible, Doctor," Margaret Hamilton said quietly, writing things down. "What about you?" "I've had my share of health issues," Sarah Jenkins said honestly. "But I'm still here." With Sarah Jenkins's approval, Doctor, Margaret Hamilton's team took DNA samples and compared them to old records and medical information from other mill worker families. What they discovered was even better than they had hoped for. Back at the university lab, a group of scientists spent many hours looking at tissue samples through powerful magnifying equipment. Just like Dr. Margaret Hamilton had said, there were special genetic markers in Sarah Jenkins's DNA test that proved their idea was right. It was a genetic change that helped lungs heal better and protected cells from harmful particles. And it all started because we looked closely at a photo that was taken 100 years ago, William Thompson said in amazement. If Lewis Hine hadn't taken that picture, those girls would have been just 3 more forgotten child workers that nobody remembered. But instead, Dr. Margaret Hamilton finished. They've shown us how humans can adapt in ways that might help us create new treatments for lung diseases caused by work. After she shared what she had learned, the news spread through all the medical and science departments. By autumn, Dr. Margaret Hamilton was speaking to a crowded auditorium at the Academic Conference on Historical Disease Studies in Boston. The discovery also changed the old Loray Mill, which had been turned into fancy apartments. It now had a small museum that told the story of its factory days. In the middle of the main display was a big copy of the Lewis Hine photo, with the story of the discovery and why it mattered written around it. Visitors would gather as a guide told them how important this was. Soon, everyone in the science world was talking about Pearl Turner, the young girl who had a genetic difference that let her survive conditions that killed many other kids her age, including her own sister. By 2015, Dr. Margaret Hamilton's research had grown from something historically interesting to a major medical discovery. At the Medical Research Conference in Atlanta, she talked to a room full of scientists and people who make medicines. Pearl's condition, which they decided to call Hamilton syndrome, was presented as a specific genetic difference that makes cellular repair work better in lung tissue that's been exposed to dangerous particles. The discovery had already helped create 2 experimental treatments for work-related lung diseases, and both were working amazingly well. Some people who disagreed said Dr. Margaret Hamilton and her team were making too big a deal out of just one case, but Dr. Margaret Hamilton didn't listen to those who doubted her work. To her, science often started with one observation that didn't match what people expected. The facts in this case were obviously clear. Pearl Turner lived while her siblings died young. That strange situation needed to be studied. What we've discovered since we started our research, similar genetic markers in children and grandchildren of factory workers from the Southeast, backs up what we found at the beginning. She told a group of questioners when they challenged her, "I don't think I'm making too big a deal out of this case." By 2022, medical trials were finished, and the first treatment based on Hamilton syndrome was approved for everyone to use. It made big news in medical and scientific magazines, starting a new time of progress in treating work-related lung diseases. Under the headline was the Lewis Hine photo, 3 young girls standing in front of a building, looking serious and facing an uncertain future. Margaret Hamilton learned something important from this experience. Behind every old photograph, every number about child labor and factory conditions, were real children with real bodies trying to stay alive. Some, like Viola Turner, couldn't change fast enough to survive. Others, like Pearl, found a way to make it through without even realizing how special they were. Did you like this story? Would you continue searching for the truth, even if others thought it was pointless? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Always stay true to what matters most to you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Have an amazing day.